Hello there, and welcome to the Second Life Book Club. My name is Draxtor Dupre. Today on the show, prolific author Julie Novakova, coming to us from the Czech Republic, from Prague. She's the author of many, many short stories. She's also the author of 7 novels in her native Czech language and an anthology of contemporary Czech sci-fi. Her recent collection of her own fabulous stories that kept me super busy this past week is called The Ship Whisperer. You see it all here on the floor and on the book stand, and you see a lot of books on the table with magnificent covers from a whole bunch of different magazines where she is alongside illustrious other authors from all over the world. And we'll talk about the magazine business a little bit today, about what it takes to submit to a magazine, get in there, and actually how do these magazines stay afloat, which is something that I really want to know. Welcome, Julie Novakova. How are you?
Hi, Draxtor. It's awesome to be here. And I'm glad we have such a great audience. I'm fine, luckily, which unfortunately cannot be said of many people in my country. But let's not delve into that. Let's just say that the pandemic is not going well here.
Yeah, I do want to open just briefly with a question how the pandemic affects you creatively, because that's fascinating. We get a lot of different answers to that. Some people, express that they're paralyzed in their creativity. So specifically with you, and I also know you have a young daughter, how do you cope? Do you have any tips or strategies how to keep busy in your profession?
Well, it's tough, but I'm lucky because I can work from home in the evenings after my daughter falls asleep, and I have all the equipment I need and everything. And my husband works from home as well, so we are relatively safe, and we are a bit privileged in this because there are still many people who have to go outside and meet a great number of people and risk getting infected. So I would say that any potential creative problems, or rather time management problems, are the least of our worries. But as
That's
to
really
tips, I would just say that whenever there's time and energy to write, I use that.
That's actually with smaller kids. You just got to say, "Oh my God, she's taking a nap. I have 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Let's do this." I mean, that's really kind of yeah. You gotta train yourself. But this is really well put because these problems of time management and getting writing done are a sign of privilege, with people literally out there staring death in the face, frankly. I mean, I feel the same way, where if I start complaining about my little things, I feel like a hypocrite. We're going to get a lot of reading today from you. The book The Ship Whisperer is amazing. Like I said, it's lying all over here on the floor. People can look at it and click on it. There's a lot of different themes along the lines of man machine interface, man or woman and animal interfacing. There are many ideas about constructs uploading your brain into the cloud and basically becoming uh, never dying. I hear some weird clicking. I hope that's is that me? Uh, so before we get into this, a quick housekeeping rundown. The show is every Wednesday, 12 o'clock Pacific time, except when we have Australians on. The show is fully booked until the end of 2021, but please do suggest authors, slbookclub at dragster.com. The show is produced by Strawberry Linden and myself. Associate producer Shyla the Super Gecko. She's in the audience. Actually, we have two Super Geckos in the audience. Location manager and prop master is Arieto Chiori with help from Arden Schwartzman, Marianne McCann, AJ McDowell. The avatars are customized by Kralos, and some avatars are made from scratch by Silas Merlin. Big thanks to Brad and Patch from Linden Lab. Big thanks to all the moles. A bigger thanks to our wonderful, diverse audience. And I need to stress this because we're listed on the destination guide. You may encounter a lot of noobs here. They may not know what's going on. Be friendly to them, befriend them, in fact, and maybe even suggest a book to them. That would make me super happy. I'm monitoring the chat on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, so you can chime in. I also monitor the local chat. If something comes up, please let me know. And Julie, I want to start with a reading by a special guest. We have our special Second Life Book Club AI. Sometimes she comes in different embodiments. Today she is this sort of anime robot, and she's going to read from a story from your book Becoming. So how would you set up the story Becoming? It's about, I read it as actually about neurodiversity and disability almost, because there's the protagonist is merged with a ship. I mean, she is a ship, and then she gets extracted from the ship and becomes a human again. How would you set up this story?
Well, you're absolutely right about that. And for me, it was a story about our senses, about how we might expand them and like that better than, let's say, the baseline human existence, and how it might also enrich lives of people who are neurodivergent and who would fare so much better with, let's say, augmented senses than baseline humans. And so imagine that you have become a spaceship or a space station in the very far reaches of the solar system. In fact, it's a station around the so far hypothesized planet 9. And then you're torn from that environment against your will and forced to live as a mere human. How do you cope with that?
Julie, this is exactly what happens to me every evening when I log off of Second Life. In Second Life, I can fly. I'm a really cool looking dude. And then I get torn out of this Second Life environment and I become this human that gets yelled at because the laundry is not put in the dryer, the kitchen is not clean. I mean, this is how I read this story, quite frankly. But seriously, so we'll hear this reading. It's about 4.5 minutes long, and we'll talk a little bit about it afterwards. And audience, fear not, because Julie, our guest, will also read. She's a wonderful reader. But just one, quick question up front about this story. The way you set it up, this protagonist is a spaceship, and then all of a sudden, she she is just a mere human. So she loses all this augmentation, but she also we hear about that she was um, disabled in the beginning, and then she was offered this job as the space station, basically. So this is really multi-layered, because you are using the her becoming the spaceship, I guess, as a metaphor for making her bigger than she was and not being confined to her disability. But on the other hand, when she becomes a human, um, I don't know. I don't know what I read this book, and I'm really scared about all this augmentation stuff. So I'm going to ask you straight out: do you want everybody to be augmented?
Well, definitely not, but I would like everybody to have the option, voluntary, of getting augmented if they want and how they want, if that's safe.
But that's going to cause all sorts of problems. I mean, we have an in uh, our society is so fundamentally unequal. Isn't the problem if some people can just augment themselves left and right? They have, well, literally a leg up, or more than one leg up.
Yeah, that's a great problem. And in fact, there are lots of people in, let's say, the transhumanism movement who are trying to combat that, for instance, by developing so far very simple augmentation like techniques in community labs and spaces where anyone can join without paying anything, just because they're interested, and they are trying not to rely on big tech companies and to be independent. But of course, we can expect that once large-scale augmentation becomes possible, it will be the domain of big tech companies, and it will be first accessible to the wealthy and the privileged. So that will very likely create all sorts of social problems. And of course, lots of science fiction explores that. And there are ways to make the society more equal beforehand, like the universal basic income, which we could also delve into. It's a topic I like quite a lot, and which is gaining more movement, especially now in times of the pandemic. So,
I couldn't agree more. Very well said. I mean, the underlying structure, if that doesn't change, it's going to be even more unequal. And the underlying structure change with UBI or other such methods. Nexus Dot in the audience says, that is cool, but you don't want to be the first in line for major neurophysiological machine augmentation. Why not, Nexus? Call me after the show. I'll get you right in there. But I'm glad that Julie you mentioned universal basic income, these things. So we'll talk about that in a bit. And don't hold back, folks. Post in the local chat. I'm monitoring all the chats. Also on YouTube, there's already a bunch of comments coming in. And now we're going to hear from the Second Life Book Club. AI will read from Becoming a Spaceship. Here we go.
One moment, I feel the solar wind tickling my skin, the comforting hum of cosmic rays, the coolant fluid flowing through my veins. I see the ionized iron glowing in the distant sun's corona and the ammonia clouds swirling on the world below. I hear the constant information exchange in my innards. As my body wakes up, I taste a change in the ventilation systems. I'm gazing inside my own body and at the stars at the same time, and then the other second I glimpse the danger. A fraction too late. A passenger who arrived on yesterday's ship, walking calmly through my corridors, suddenly raising his hand towards one of my panels, entering a sequence I recognize. Before I can react, he enters the last character, and I no longer can. My panels and speakers are inaccessible to me. I'm mute. This is it, I think, strangely calm, cut off from my autonomous circuitry. My reflexes are quick. I fire from my particle accelerators and feel the exhilarating rush of excitement. People flow through my cavities, directing towards their escape. The energy flow in my veins reorganizes and surges into weaponry. With some detachment, I observe my inside while gazing outside, where a few infrabright dots close upon me from several directions. I take out one, then a second, third, sharp sting of pain where my cooling panels had been. A hit severs me from most of my body. I'm blinded, I'm deafened, I cannot taste nor smell, and all I feel on my skin is suddenly a distant dumb coldness as if my body belonged to someone else. Something touches my skin. Is it my skin? It feels rubbery, dumb, and wrong. I still cannot see anything. I cannot perceive anything but the pain. A hollow pain spreading through my suddenly shrunken and unreal body. Suddenly it is joined by a sharp sting of pain in my neck. Neck? I have a neck? What happened? Where? No data. No census. No. Wait, wrong. Some but unfamiliar. Trouble finding words. Memory. Something wrong with my memory. Opening my eyes. My eyes? My eyes? Soft and sharp at the same time. Below, a fabric. Unusual sensation. Sounds horrendous. Off-white. Sweet. Above, a ceiling. Where? Should be panicking. Maybe a week elapses. I finally understand their words. They're doctors treating me. What happened? They don't tell me. Once I'm able to ask, they talk of unfortunate events saving me and how making progress. I know. I had been attacked. Destroyed most of me. Why? Why didn't they kill me completely? Miss Montova, the man in gray says with a serious face, you have made tremendous progress. Let me congratulate you on your recovery. Recovery? From what? Despite myself, I'm proud of the coherence of my speech. Your imprisonment. We freed you. Do you remember? You were their slave, chained into the heart of the station, made into the control node in the station system, your brain forced into a data integration center. It was monstrous, inhumane. No, I whisper. That's not how I remember it. I volunteered. I was a good candidate. I wanted to become the station's control center. I remember lying on the bed, helpless, unable to even pick up a glass of water and bring it to my dry lips. So weak, rare progressive muscle dystrophy, I recall a phrase. Incurable. I spent most of my time immobilized until I heard of the call for a new station master. That's how they wanted you to remember it. It's hard, I know, but you must believe me. Luckily, we managed to cleanse your body of most of the artificial metabolites and reverse the atrocities they did to you to some extent, but I have faith in you. I close my eyes. Even with my external memory and backups gone, I can still imagine the gentle touch of the solar wind on my sensor loaded metal skin. He perhaps interprets my silence as a sign of uncertainty. Don't be afraid. It really is over. He doesn't know that this is precisely my greatest fear.
And that's our book club AI reading from Julie Novakova's Becoming, out of her anthology of her own um, stories, her compilation, The Ship Whisperer. And Julie has said this before, but this really remembers. I mean, she says here, they're taking stuff away from me. That she has feels she has become mute, and the doctor said, "Well, we fixed you." And I work a lot with the disability community. As a matter of fact, Shyla, who is in the audience, who is co-producing the show, that's what I learned from her filming her for a documentary where she said, the um, conflict between people with disabilities and doctors are often that doctors are just trained to fix things, right? And this lies in the eye of the beholder what that really means. And I think you did a beautiful job here with the metaphor of her being a ship and then being brought outside of that ship while the doctor thinks, hey, we actually rescued you, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, in my view, anyone should have the option of, let's call it, fixing themselves, their senses, or anything else. But it should be a voluntary option, not forced upon them.
hmm The themes in the Ship Whisperer, I mean, there's a lot of different stories, a lot of different themes, but there are some recurring ones. You mentioned transhumanism, man machine, merging, but also human animal merging. There's a story about a woman who can she communicates with animals, and in that story she communicates with an elephant, and she can feel the elephant's feelings, and the stress becomes her own. So those are themes. And then related to that, you also write about synesthesia, which I wasn't aware of until a few years ago. I met someone and I profiled that person here in Second Life. So synesthesia is where people experience their surroundings as colors, right? Or as tastes, or as musical notes.
Yeah, it can be mixing of any two or more of the senses. You can, let's say, hear colors or see sounds and etc.
And tell me a little bit about how you came across this phenomenon with synesthesia and how you wove that into the story. There's two stories. There's one about a VR product where you can actually experience smell, which is interesting because there is a researcher by the name of Jackie Morey who started experimenting that in 2012. And then there's another story about synesthesia where it's about music. There is a protagonist with, I guess, multiple personality. I don't want to say disorder because she is in communication with her different personalities, but she uses them to compose beautiful music.
Yeah, and well, synesthesia also appears in Becoming, as everyone has heard right now in the excerpt, because when the protagonist is torn from the space station and forced to be a human, her senses become mixed, and she can hear the ceiling and taste the environment around her. So she also loses that ability in the course of becoming, let's say, more like a baseline human. But yeah, it appears there. And I first encountered this phenomenon in reading for some class at my faculty because I studied evolutionary biology. And I was instantly very intrigued by that. And I also remember a few science fiction and fantasy stories that explored it brilliantly. And most of them, most of which I love, Jeffrey Ford's The Empire of Ice Cream, if I remember the title correctly. It's a novelette about a young boy who perceives tastes in a different way than most humans. And it's absolutely amazing. And I also considered doing some research on synesthesia, but in the end, I didn't, and it just became an interest of mine. I also experienced it twice. In both cases, after I had to take analgesics because I had a headache or a cold coming, and I listened to music, and then I smelled some really like smells that couldn't have been in the surroundings, and that was my perception of the music. It was very
So
weird.
you experienced the music as smell. So as the
Yeah.
music changed, what, and I think you write this in there too, was Carmina Burana and some pop song. This is fascinating. So you so what was the smell changing with the mood of the music? I mean, Carmina Burana is kind of, I guess, all the way through. There is a certain uh, aggression and fervor to Carmina Burana that is sort of consistent. But I was wondering if the smell, then how the smell changed when the music kind of calms down a little bit and then speeds up or gets more loud. Does the smell change too?
Well, I would have loved it to last longer, but in both cases, the sensation lasted less than a minute and it changed a little. But in case of Carmina Burana, it was like smelling lemons, limes, and it changed a little bit. And in the second case, which was actually swing music, it was like smelling peanuts very strongly, just peanuts, nothing else.
This is amazing. Actually forgot to mention earlier that you are a I don't know if you're still in school or if you have a doctorate in evolutionary
Well,
biology.
I'm actually attempting to finish my doctorate this year.
Ah, that you picked a good year, 2021. I hear good things about this year. Um, so the other thing, and we're gonna hear you read from the Ship Whisperer from the title story in just a bit. If you're just tuning in, there's a whole bunch of comments here. People don't know what's going on here on YouTube. This is the Second Life Book Club. We do this every Wednesday, 12 o'clock Pacific time, Second Life time. And today's guest is Julie Novakova, very prolific author of many books that I unfortunately cannot read because they're in Czech. So I have to learn the language. And but a lot of stories, and we're going to talk about translation later too. Um, Another story that I love is has to do with constructs. I mean, you call them constructs in the story. That's basically um, a mixture of memories and information that is available about a person that passed away, and that information gets uploaded and gets stored, and that is a company that offers that, and then you can sort of access that if you're a relative, I guess. Um, it's super interesting how you set this up because there is a guy who contacts this company and he wants to talk to a person that passed away, and what he wants to talk to her about is essentially uh, I'm not spoiling it, but it's essentially a piece of information that he was carrying with him uh, past the death of this other person, and that was very important to the survivor to tell that deceased person, so that the survivor needed closure, and he recruits the company who has this construct uploaded in the cloud, and lures them into a situation where they give him access to that person. So it's really about like, can we make peace with the fact that when people pass away, um, maybe we can't have everything completely neatly closed off.
Yeah, I mean, in writing this story, I was inspired by several occurrences of something similar in a simpler way so far, because several chatbots have been built of dead people based on their email conversations, chats, and more information about them. And if I'm not mistaken,
Sorry to
yeah.
jump in here, but thank you for clarifying this also. I think I wasn't clear, because the interesting conceit about your story is that that this construct is not like in some other stories by some other prominent writers. It's not sort of a perfect uploading of the entire brain into the cloud. No, it's really assembled from stuff that was available, right? Like email, maybe journals or some sort. So it's not a complete, in your story, it's not a complete replica, um, of that person's personality and soul. So sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that we'll be seeing this kind of thing more and more, and not just for deceased people, but for living people as well. I mean, we can see quite sophisticated, let's say, chatbots not built based on any specific person that communicate with people in online stores or elsewhere. And we will probably witness the rise of chatbots of maybe celebrities, or perhaps scientists who have too little time to communicate with everyone interested in their results, and so on. And it's going to be quite interesting how this kind of thing plays out. And of course, there's going to be a lot of interest in these, let's say, glorified chatbots of deceased people. And they might bring us a sense of closure, but I would say it's a kind of false sense of closure, because we're not interacting with the person themselves. They are dead and they cannot be reached in any way. So basically, if we build such constructs, we are doing it for ourselves, and uh, no matter what we tell ourselves and our surroundings about giving a tribute to the deceased and so on, it's basically for our own advantage.
Very well put. That's really how I read it too. And matter of fact, I'm looking here at my notes. What I find the commonality about all your stories is that they are very open-ended, and I really love that. I mean, you have a very distinctive style, but one of the things is as I can see, a courage. You have the guts to keep it very open. It's almost like you're posing specific questions, and then you're leaving these questions. And I've read a lot of stuff where I felt the author was either too afraid or compelled by an editor or somebody else said you can't leave this open like this. People will revolt. I mean, we have people revolting against Star Wars. What did you do? You cast this one guy. You're ruining my childhood. And so, but this is a common stylistic element that I see with you, with this construct story and with these others too. There's an openness about them where you sleep over it, and it just keeps working, because you're literally thinking of, I mean, at least with me, thinking of 10 different scenarios where this could go, right? And another writer would probably start where you're ending. So how are you conscious of this, or have you been, has this been pointed out to you, maybe in a positive or maybe in a negative way?
Well, yeah, I'm conscious of it, and I really like this kind of stories, both as a writer and as a reader. And it has been pointed out in reviews in both the positive and negative way. It really depends on the kind of reader. And I would say that I like this kind of ending because I don't know the answers. And if I read a story with a similar topic, I would probably be disappointed a bit if it ended in a very specific, closed way, because I would be like, but what if this happened? Or you didn't consider this angle, and it might be taken so much differently by the society. So I really like open-ended stories because of this.
Wonderful. That's maybe the scientist in you. So I would say let's read from the ship whisperer, and your avatar will go to the front of the stage, to the podium. Oftentimes we have people actually fall off the stage, but no more, because we now have a security invisible wall that was put here by Arieto Chiori, our set manager, set builder. Now, briefly, if you would, set up the ship whisperer, and what is this about, and what are we going to hear? Oh, I'm sorry. I want to actually read real quick the links here in the chat, because people are posting very interesting links. Jerry was mentioning earlier the chat bot, and there's a Business Insider article, Eternamine and Replica giving life to the dead with new technology. I guess this is referencing the chatbots. And there's a bunch of links here which I will save and put on the blog when this comes out on Monday. And Tsai Cheng is saying there's this man in Germany who wrote a book on his mental health issues. He had a sort of robot made for him to give his lectures. It's an art project I visited in 2019. It was kind of hard to figure out when he started to talk whether it was a person in that chair or a robot. And Tsai is mentioning Thomas Melle. He has a robot made after him. And she put the links here, and I will save those links. But now, Julie, what is the ship whisperer about?
Well, imagine a far future where humanity has settled several other stellar systems, and people from one of them noticed an impossible object, a black dwarf, which is a stellar remnant, a white dwarf after it has cooled, so that it's almost indistinguishable from the cosmic background. And for a white dwarf to cool, it would take trillions of years, like magnitudes more than the current age of the universe. So they set out to explain this anomaly, and some of them want to misuse it for purposes of war and violence. And the protagonist doesn't like that very much. He is a kind of person who doesn't get along with people very much, not because he doesn't understand them, but perhaps because he can understand them all too much. And he prefers the company of spaceships, which all have artificial personalities in their quantum computer brains. And well, let's say that he and the spaceship have a different opinion of what to do with the anomaly than some of the other crew.
And one little note, and again, this is also here the angle of neurodivergent people. This wonderful main protagonist is, as you said, more comfortable talking actually to spaceships. We would say maybe this person is on the spectrum in your scenario of understanding spaceships better than maybe humans.
Well, actually, he understands humans very well. He just doesn't like humans.
Ah,
Well, let's start. Even in these sophisticated times, it's a common enough superstition that breaking a mirror brings you 7 years of bad luck. Nonetheless, Nowhere it says what happens if you start with a broken mirror and glue the pieces back together. I'll tell you my own story, the story of a broken mirror. I might start 34 subjective years ago, the moment I was conceived broken already. Or I might lead you straight here, staring into darkness and pondering on its meaning. But this is no regular darkness. In infrared, it glows just somewhat more than the background. You might mistake it for an extremely cold and dim brown dwarf. A measurement of its mass, gravitational pull, and composition would result in an entirely different conclusion that does not fit neatly in an orderly universe. What you find so difficult to describe is a black dwarf, a remnant of a long gone star, so old that nature forbids its very existence. Yet all the evidence is here. The impossibility exists. The measurements are repeated countless times, all leading to the same answer in the end. However, you're observing this outrageous object from a distance of several light years. You desperately want to study it close up. That's where I come into the story, along with Giordano Bruno and four other long-dead famous ponderers of the cosmic perspective. Hard to spot, is it? I flinched and turned abruptly into zero G. Not only had the visitor disturbed me gazing out, he had also interrupted a soundless conversation going on in my head. It was Colonel Torres himself. Who else could make such an innocent remark sound like an accusation? I wasn't trying to see it. He snorted. You're lying. Everyone wants to see it with their own eyes, even if they know they'll see nothing. Torres was right. I had been trying to locate the object visually. However, with our current distance, its diameter would be less than 2 arc minutes. A lot for any luminous or illuminated object to be visible at first sight. Very little if the thing you're trying to spot is pitch black. We had crossed nearly 5 light years for a thing we cannot even see. There. A star should be visible between those two. Ross 1015b must be in line of sight, and you can notice the slightly bent light around it. The colonel frowned. The ship told you right now, didn't she? I didn't deny it. I waited for him to state the reason why he came. His face gave away nothing, even though I was good at noticing signs of emotions. He was holding himself carefully in front of me. We've got a problem with one of the shuttles. Sort it out, Torres said with his usual directness. I followed him through the main hub. Adjusting for weight felt strange. I'd always felt at home in zero G, unlike most people. But I guess that's the smallest of my quirks. There was an unusual buzz in the corridors. It seemed as if everyone who had already been awake suddenly had to go somewhere. Mostly military crew. I didn't see many scientists here. And Torres had mentioned a shuttle, even though no launch was on the schedule. I was supposed to know what was going on. Giordano Bruno was definitely supposed to know. What is this about? Classified information, replied the ship. It sounded apologetic in my head. I tried recent findings, but there was nothing accessible to me that would result in a shuttle launch. Hopefully, Torres would provide an explanation. Pleasant zero G again. The docking section by Giordano Bruno's spine. And even more commotion here. The nearest one, Torres said. It responds to nav adjustments too slowly. Everything else seems to be working just fine. Fix it. As if it was that easy, just up to me. I strapped myself in the cockpit, whispered a brief apology to Giordano, and suppressed my link with the ship. Then I reached for Nicolaus Copernicus' cable. I felt the presence of an alien mind as soon as the connector touched my interface. It let me ping it, get closer, see, hear, taste, smell and touch its centers. It seemed awfully small and simple compared to the vast web of Giordano Bruno's mind. The shuttle's quantum computers were less powerful than the ship's by orders of magnitude. If Bruno was a human, Copernicus, Kepler, Brahe, and Galilei might be lizards. There, a minor glitch, nevertheless interfering with the shuttle's operation. The procedure was clear. Nudge the mind, let it find and examine it, insert a solution, wait until it repairs itself. Unsuccessful, twice. Then it finally let me guide it right to the problem and solve it. Sniffing, closing in. Copernicus was suddenly more aware of my presence, eager to explore the strange other mind. I severed the link before giving it a chance. I emerged back from the shuttle. Ready. Everything should be operational now. Colonel Torres nodded expressionless. Nothing else, as if he expected me to go away now. I had no intention of doing that. Now that I've repaired it, may I know why do you need the shuttle, and why do you need its quantum computer online when I'm the only controller awake? I assure you, the shuttles can fly on regular computers as well. You may not. You're released, Torres added when I didn't move. I hesitated. Torres finally lost his patience. Will you get out of the fucking way? For God's sake, you ship whisperers are a bunch of weirdos. One awake at a time is more than enough, I say. No wonder you talk to the ships if you fail to comprehend a human conversation. I left without another word. Torres was wrong. I didn't choose this job because I was bad at people. I chose it exactly because of the opposite. Sometimes I was too good at understanding people. I wanted to provoke him, to see how angry my disobedience would make him. And it was certainly much more than I'd expect if this was some routine thing, despite his dislike of me. Something big was going on. Okay.
And that is Julie Novakova reading from the title story of The Ship Whisperer. Now that is, and thank you for correcting me earlier, because my take was not 100% accurate, because this protagonist does understand people. It's almost like Star Trek Next Generation. Counselor Troy, but with a provocative streak, I guess, right?
Well, if you want a TNG example, I'd say that he's basically a cross between Troy and Data, with maybe a little bit of Worf thrown in.
Oh my God! See, this is wow. This leads perfectly to my next segment here, where I want to ask you, how much are you influenced by American culture? But before we go there, what is interesting, I mean, this is, I guess, hard sci-fi, right? I mean, you write actually in your own bio on your website that you are a writer of sci-fi and detective stories and fantasy. And I hope we'll get another quick reading later on. The time is racing, but how is hard sci-fi not something that is like really, I don't know, very niche? I mean, isn't this just for people who want, like, pages and pages of descriptions of technology that doesn't really exist?
You're trying to provoke me.
Yes, I'm learning.
Well, I'd say that it isn't niche at all, because hard sci-fi stories should be most of all good, entertaining stories. And it doesn't matter who's reading them. They shouldn't be aimed solely at one very tiny specific portion of the audience. I'd say that hard science fiction has the advantage of combining great stories and lifelike characters with also believable and exciting science and technology. And in my view, that makes them even greater, because there are many stories that are amazing and that have very rich and relatable characters that hard science fiction sometimes has the added advantage of proposing burning questions that are related to current or near future or imaginable in the far future science and technology that we will have to face sooner or later. It can be the creation of constructs of deceased people. It can be our relationship with AI. It can be modification of our own bodies, or it can be genetic engineering. And these are things that we have to cope with as a whole society. And hard science fiction can provide some sandbox for us to explore them in and to try to address these questions, even though, as I said, I don't really know the answers.
Yeah, yeah. You sci-fi writers, you have it very easy. You throw stuff out like UBI would be very cool, universal basic income, and then economists have to figure out how to actually implement that. But since you mentioned it, have you envisioned a UBI scenario in one of your stories yet?
Well, it's mostly in the background if it's there, but I have written an essay on UB for a recent Czech anthology, Robot 100, 100 reasons, which in Czech is like a wordplay because the engineer in Karel Čapek's play RUR, Rosum's Universal Robots, is named Rosum, which sounds like rozum, which means reason in Czech. So there you have it. And there are over 100 essays related to the topic of robots and to Čapek's play, which influenced, well, now it's 100 years of literature and technology and society. And that's where I wrote about how Čapek envisions the displacement of human workers by robots and how we can imagine a very different future if we implement the universal basic income and try to address the loss of jobs to technology.
And this is really perfect that you mentioned that because oh my God, this is a little bit stretched here. The image, I put an image up from a recent reissue of Karel Čapek's RUR, Rossum's Universal Robots. And this is really synergy, as you mentioned that, and this is in my run sheet, and Shyla mentions it here in the local chat. In 1921, Karel Čapek releases RUR, and in it he invents the word robot. The book was highly successful internationally. Shyla writes here in the chat, did Čapek foresee the AI takeover, or was it meant as an allegory of Czech life in 1921, or both? Or has the reading, I guess, changed over the years of this book?
Well, the reading has definitely changed, but I would say that Čapek himself intended both. Both the allegory of, let's see, the human condition, not just Czech, and the rise of machines. I mean, we can observe fear from human displacement from jobs, even in the 18th century when first machines started to be used for making fabrics. And then we have the Luddite movement and so on. So from that, we have moved into the present, which actually can be the first time when machines actually take more jobs than they create. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just grabbing an image here from Karel Čapek's RUR. This is from a BBC production that you see now in the back here. Let me make sure that we have those credits right. So, but this leads me to, if the camera can zoom to the screen here overhead, and I encourage everyone to read Karel Čapek's. It's so interesting, Julie, that you come on, because literally a month ago or so, I bought this in the SF Masterworks edition, Chupex RUR, and War with the Newts, which is also very interesting. But I want to throw up a bunch of images because I was born in 1970 when what is now the Czech Republic was Czechoslovakia behind the Iron Curtain, part of the Soviet bloc, and Germany and Czechoslovakia collaborated on amazing television shows. One of them was Adam 84. And I'm going to put up some images here in the back. And Julie, you're probably way too young. I don't know if you even remember those, but Adam 84 was a completely mind-blowing sci-fi series. So folks, please look at those images. And this was very much on par with what was produced at the time in America and the UK. It was about a group of scientists in the future coming back, having to go back to 1984 to change the past. It was incredibly elaborate in its envisioning of societal structures. The special effects were amazing. Here is an image of the um, congregation of the World Rat, the people who run the planet. Interestingly enough, in the back, you see a hand with an eye in the middle, almost like the Second Life logo. Then, of course, was Pantau, which was a
Yeah.
series about this guy who had a sort of a magic hat. He could make himself small, he could make himself big. The hat could conjure up objects. He was very, very nice to young people, kids. He did not speak, he just acted in pantomime. And he had this magical hat where he could make himself big and could make himself small. I hope people can see these images that they're resing in time. And lastly, from my youth was a show called Lucy, Schrecken der Straße in German, with two little figurines who were made of Play-Doh, basically. And these Play-Doh, this was stop motion animation. These little Play-Doh figures, we see them now here, they could change their um, structure. They could be anything. Here, they're playing little animals. They could just go down the drain. They could hide. And Lucy was the only one seeing. Well, everybody could see them, but they were hiding, of course, from the adults. So it was that kind of magic of the child being the only one who sees them. And lastly, in my little monologue here, Julie is going back with Jan Svankmajer, who is one of the greatest stop motion animators in the world. I mean, he's actually still alive. I looked it up. I wasn't aware of it. I had a Jan Svankmajer phase. This is, belongs to Czech surrealism. Very, very strange scenarios here. He did an Alice in Wonderland story. He did a version of Faust. All stop motion animation. People, I assuming that people know what stop motion animation is. This is a still from Alice in Wonderland. This is a still from Faust. Really, really creepy sets, characters, and lighting, incredible lighting. His colleague was Jiri Trinka, also stop motion animation. This is from a show called The Hand. Not a show, a short film called The Hand. And I guess my question for Julie is, how much are you influenced, you think, from the incredibly rich uh, history of art in your country, in your culture, that is influencing, American culture? Because I was thinking, like, how do I formulate this question to you?
Mhm.
Everybody wants to go to America. Everybody wants to open up to the American market. I mean, the word robot was literally invented in your country, and now it comes back. So where do you, take it where you will. Are you influenced? Where do you see your influences, and where do you want to go? Because I also know that you write in English now and have been for a number of years.
Yeah, and basically, everything you mentioned was the stuff of my childhood. I especially loved Mr. Tao, and it's still very popular in the Czech Republic. And we can take it as a fantasy because he basically does magic, or it looks like magic. But in fact, in the story, he's an alien and he's from Tau Ceti. That's why Mr. Tau. Uh, and I was also influenced by early Czech speculative fiction, much earlier than what you mentioned, especially writers who wrote not just in Czech but also in German. From Czech writers, it was especially Jiří Karásek z Lvovitz, who wrote novels and poems, and he was also an editor and a very interesting person. And he had a trilogy focused on three different figures of mages, and one of the books also focused on a golem, which is a popular figure in Czech traditions, and it's also reflected in the Czech literature written in German, like The Golem by Gustav Meyrink, or in other works, let's say by Paul Lepin. And of course, then we have Franz Kafka, who is probably the best known writer of a geographically Czech origin, even though he wrote in German. So all of these are my influences to some extent. I would say that more in fantasy than in science fiction writing. And as to science fiction, I was influenced mostly by a mixture of Eastern and Anglo-American science fiction, because in Eastern Europe, science fiction, there was Stanislav Lem, a real giant of science fiction.
Mm.
And I loved The Invincible, especially. I mean, everyone loves Solaris. It's great, but The Invincible is even better. And I also liked the quite funny short stories of the Pilot Briggs, and well, basically everything by Lamb. And then I started reading A.C. Clarke, who was British, but we can, let's say, make a label of Anglo-American science fiction. And then I started reading Asimov and more Americans. But yeah, I would say that the influences are very much mixed.
I talked with
And
Shyla earlier, who also we talked about RUR Chapek, and actually Jerry reminds us that RUR did premiere January 25th, 1921, almost exactly 100 years ago. This
yeah,
is
just two
actually
days.
quite amazing. This is a total coincidence. It, one of the similarities that I saw when I read your stories and I was looking into Jan Svankmajer and those animators, is that they were, they were anti-communist, but they were also anti-capitalist. They saw they saw it as two sides of the same coin, basically a structure from above that they wanted to get, you know, uh, rid of, because it was from a top down uh, approach that was limiting them in their artistry. And one of the things that they wrote, Svankmajer, was the union between nature and man, and that's something also in your book, that is a lot in your book, especially the story where the woman with her implant merges, I was going to say, but she's able to empathize with the elephant, and that also is a through line. And if I look at the objects or the music, there's a story about a ship that where the ship's crew is all really living through their musical expression. It's a type of unity with the elements, with the art, and with nature, that that is very reminiscent of all the stuff that Svankmajer still does. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Is that
And
something that is not present in America, where everything has to be killed and harvested and made into money, Julie?
I wouldn't say so. I think actually that one of the best known American TV shows and movie franchises is very much about being both non-communist and non-capitalist, and living in a society that's as equal as possible, and while using high tech and exploring the world scientifically, still being in touch with nature and art. And that's, of course, Star Trek.
Very well put. Although I do think, and there's stuff written on it, I do read I do, as a Marxist myself, I do read Star Trek as a communist structure. But send me emails. Let's discuss it. If you're just tuning in right now, you're tuning in a little bit late, but you can watch this on replay. It's going to be archived and it's going to be on the podcast on Monday as well. Julie Novakova is my guest on the Second Life Book Club, and I just talked with the producer in our back channel. She graciously gave us 10 more minutes. So we have to skip the other reading. As much as I would love the other reading, you prepared two more readings. One one sci-fi, one is, I don't know if that's considered historical fiction, I guess, but it plays actually in the 1930s. I haven't read the full story, didn't get around it, but you have this incredible output in magazines. So the last 10 minutes, I want to talk briefly about the magazine scene. So you submit to magazines, they take it or they leave it. When they take it, you get paid. Um, that doesn't mean that they publish it. I actually had a conversation with someone today where they said, well, I sold it and that's good. I got some money, but I haven't been published for a year now. So can you give us a little primer for people who really don't know the richness of the magazine scene? And we have a lot of magazines here on the table. Maybe the camera can pan over it on the table. Yeah, amazing. And also, yeah, we see it now here on the stream. Um, magazines, but also your novels in Czech language that are not available in English are also on the table. But anyways, tons of magazines out there. I don't know how they survive. I don't know what their business model is. Please enlighten us in terms of uh, that procedure: submitting, getting paid, getting published. What's the business model? Go.
Well, basically, for authors who described it pretty well, you have to write the story as well as you can, and you start submitting it to magazines that, in your opinion, might like the story. You, of course, have to know the magazines at least a bit, so you should have read at least a few issues before submitting to a magazine. And that's not a problem nowadays because lots of great magazines are fully online. And basically, their business model is based on selling ebooks via traditional places like Amazon or elsewhere, and also by getting supporters on Patreon and similar platforms, or building their own platform, or having a yearly drive or Kickstarters and so on. And amazingly, it works because the market is so big. I mean, lots of
So
people
they
around.
must sell
Yeah.
enough ebooks, because a lot of the stories, I mean, your stories are free to read here. And then of course I go to the website, I can read them, and then of course they ask me to purchase the issue on ebooks. But that's fascinating. That seems to work, even though they publish a lot of the stuff online for free.
Well, I can recommend reading some editorials by Neil Clark, who is the editor of Clark's World, one of the best known and longest running online magazines. And I'm not sure how the numbers have changed, but a few years back, I think he had some 7 to 8% paying readers, which in the Anglophone world is still a lot, and it's enough to support the magazine and allow it to pay pro rates to contributors. And basically, the Anglophone market is the only one where this could work. I'm not sure whether something like that could work in China, where there are also lots of Chinese-speaking people and lots of lovers of science fiction. But maybe it wouldn't work so much politically and socially. But on the English-speaking market, it can definitely work, even though nowadays there are lots of magazines with this business model. And of course, to some extent, there is competition. But nonetheless, we have Clark's World, we have Strange Horizons, and its translation focused sub-magazine Samovar. We have Beneath Ceaseless Skies and Uncanny, and so many more magazines that put most or all of their stories and podcasts on their websites for free, and it works. On the Czech market, there would be no chance of this working because it's so very small. And that's one of the
I mean,
yeah
that would probably also, there's Mithila. Mithila is also
yeah
something that I came across. But that answers, I guess, the question I have, why you started writing in English. I mean, that's a no-brainer that you want to you want to get in there. And if you are capable of speaking the language the level that you are, I mean, why wouldn't you write in English, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I was actually getting to this because getting into the English speaking market has two great advantages for an author. One is much greater exposure because there is greater readership in terms of the numbers. And of course, there is also better pay because if I should compare professional rates in English speaking magazines and professional rates of Czech magazines, it's like a tenfold difference. So it's quite a lot.
Wow. Shaila here is asking about translation. What is she saying? I'd like to know a little bit more about how to translate works. Can you tell us about the process of translating a book, some of the key aspects which help ensure it succeeds in a foreign market? You do translating work. Uh, Gotta keep those answers short. God, we have to do a 2-hour show. This is ridiculous. Where are my producers? I want a meeting. I need to have a meeting. But yeah, and so that's a good question. Like, how are you involved with translating? And then my follow-up would be, you should translate your 7 novels that are lying around.
Well, first of all, on the English speaking market, you need an agent for a novel, which I'm in the process of getting, hopefully, after I revise my first novel written directly in English. But translation is a job that takes a lot of time and effort, and it's easier to start with short stories. And I have translated stories, both of my own and by other Czech writers. And I mostly translate the stuff I love and I think should be accessible to as many readers as possible. That's why several stories by an interesting Czech writer, Hanuš Seiner, ended up at Tor.com and in Strange Horizons and FNSF. I do love his writing, and especially Hexagrammaton, which was published by Tor.com, is so just stunning, simply stunning, I would say. And to translate, you need, of course, to know both languages, but you also need to know the market, and the story needs to click with you. I have also translated commercially, and I mean, the output was good. Uh, I wouldn't do bad work, but it works so much better if you're translating something that you love and that is close to you.
Oh, absolutely. The last question, real quick. The scene, the Czech scene, are you in touch with that scene? Is it a good scene? Is it a scene that is, kind to each other, or is it stepping over dead bodies? If I get success in that market, then that means that I have to kill you.
Well, not really. It's a scene with a very active and friendly fandom. But as I mentioned, it's a kind of a small scene We have two professional magazines for science fiction and fantasy, and both are making ends meet. One ran on the Czech variant of Kickstarter last year just to survive because it would cease publication for the third time in the last decade otherwise. So you can imagine how it works financially. I mean, the human factor is great, but it's hard to, or basically impossible to make a living with speculative fiction just in Czech.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine. Again, I mean, this is thank you for demystifying this rich, tapestry of magazines. I mean, I'm really new to all this, and I'm gonna have to really dive into the whole magazine thing. And I know that a few of them are also shipping, physical books. People know that I like to read physical books. If
Yeah,
people
and
have,
especially the
sorry,
big
go ahead.
three. Sorry, especially the big three are shipping physical copies around the world. That's FNSF, Asimov's, and Analog. But you can also order physical copies of magazines such as Clark's World that are accessible online. It's just not so common.
And then you have to be published, of course, in order to be eligible for award. Because I also see in all the people that I follow on Twitter and you also on your website, everybody's going, "It's award. I'm eligible for award." So that's basically the structure, right? You have to be published in a magazine, and then you're eligible, and then people have to submit you, or do you submit that to these awards?
No, it's submitted either by a jury or by readers or attendees by a convention. Depends on the specific awards.
So you got to get your fans. You got to get your fans going. All right. Julie Novakova, thank you so much. This was really really wonderful. Big round of text applause, please, in the local chat. This was really really wonderful. We are going to have you for the post game until the bottom of the hour for another 15 minutes or so for audience questions. So get those questions ready. Big thanks to Julie Novakova. Big thanks to my team, and the biggest thanks always goes out to the audience, because this is not just a weekly show. This is a persistent community. The book club island is a persistent place that is visited by 200 to 300 people every single day. And I'm not claiming that every one of those people is an avid reader. There are people who they may have searched for, I don't know, a casino or something, or a beach, and then they show up here. So we gently lure them back into reading and show them how awesome reading is. So that's our nefarious goal here. Next week we have a wonderful author of children's books, illustrated children's books, and also novels, Sharanaya, and I have to still practice her name, Sharanya Manivanan, and she'll correct me or kill me next week. She's going to appear as a wonderful Dinky. Her children's book Amuchi Poochie will build a special world with her illustrations, so that's going to be a wonderful show. Um, Again, Julie, thank you so much, and thank you everyone. Stick around. Come back next week, Wednesday, 12 o'clock, when it's time again for the Second Life Book Club.
Thank you so much. It's